Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would discuss with you guys a very interesting and very simple tricep accessory movement to do that I started doing somewhat recently because I've been doing different variations of the JM press, and it's one I came across actually by looking at Dave Tate, and it's actually a really phenomenal exercise. Now, for a lot of people who aren't aware, the JM press is normally a cross between a skull crusher and a closed grip bench press. It's used as a bench press accessory for the triceps, but it's a compound movement that is very, very, very tricep dominant. Right? We utilize the chest and front delts in it, but the triceps do the vast majority of the work. And what we usually know based upon the different studies that are out there is that sometimes when we find compound or multi-joint exercises to do even for a smaller muscle, that a lot of times it creates a very, very good strength. They tend to get very good strength to go with the muscle mass because there is a motor unit learning component. And because if you think about like something like a bench press, and the way that the tricep gets utilized in it, this focuses a very, very similar movement pattern and strength curve itself for the tricep, but you're not being limited by things like pecs and front delts. In other words, your triceps are what's going to fail on this exercise. When you get your last rep or you reach muscle failure, you reach your limit weight on it, it's going to be the triceps that give out because they're taking the brunt of it. But they are put into a movement pattern that is the same as the bench press. So it is a direct carryover in terms of the way the triceps operate in it. And it's not to say that all tricep growth wouldn't increase any press, because generally there'll always be some carryover because bigger muscle has more strength potential. But in this case, we would be training both hypertrophy and the movement pattern. Now, what's interesting to me is when we do them on the floor, we create that total stop effect, right? We create that stop effect. Because just like the floor press, we're coming to a dead stop because your arms hit the ground. Now you'll notice the difference between this and a floor press as I do the different angles, that this is not a floor press. You're not coming down to the lower chest and touching. In my case, I touch on the floor press. Most people are not thick enough to do that. But I touch on the floor press. But in this case, you'll notice it's not coming down to the lower chest. It's coming over the face. So if you notice, it's like a skull crusher. It's like a skull crusher, but again, it's combining it with something like a closed grip bench press. So you're bringing the bar over your face while using a bunch of elbow tuck. Now with that dead stop at the bottom, it creates a different effect. We don't get like a stretch reflex, and it does slightly limit the range of motion, but one of the complaints that people do have is that JM presses can tend to be a little bit hard sometimes at the bottom on the tendon to your elbows. That is generally the biggest complaint of the exercise. There are plenty of people out there who feel like this would be the perfect tricep exercise if it were not for the tendonitis it can generate on the elbows, just like a skull crusher can. And that's one reason I use a lot of chains and stuff like that for tricep movements to eliminate that. And this is something that a lot of power lifters have to deal with. A lot of times you'll see bodybuilders and other people, they'll just do tricep exercises that create tendonitis and not care. Right? They just don't care. Oh, I'll just wear a sleeve, I'll wear a wrap. Or they'll complain about their elbows and they'll try to blame stuff like the bench press lockout. Now, ironically, what you see is that most strength athletes who have to do a lot of pressing, they figured out already that the lockout work is not what's causing the elbow pain. It's not the heavy lockouts on the knee presses. There's nothing inherently risky about bench pressing and locking out 500 pounds if you're strong enough to do it in terms of elbows and tendons. It is that rubbing of the tendon against the bone on certain tricep movements. It's not the joint, right? It's not the lockout. It's usually what happens down near the bottom of those movements. Now, on a lot of skull crushers, that'll be the bottom, but on certain tricep movements, like when you pull the elbows to the side, what is it? Well, it's that keeping the elbows pulled into the side causes it, because of that tension it puts when, say, the cable gets to the top and you have your elbows pulled in hard to your side. The really strict bodybuilder type tends to cause the tendons of the triceps to rub against the bones of the elbow. What does that do? That inflames the tendons. And it's one thing to have stress, right? When we have pulling on a tendon, like when we create tension on a tendon through mechanical stress of pulling, that's adaptative. In other words, loading a tendon against weight and pulling against that weight, or the weight pulling against the tendon, right? Because that's really what's happening. The tendon itself can't contract. So the muscle pulls one way and the weight pulls it a different way. It stretches, it pulls, right? Stretches it like a rubber band almost, but it's not as stretchy as a rubber band. And it can create micro tears. Well, that micro tearing in tendons, if we give it sufficient rest, does what? It makes tendons stronger and thicker. It makes them bigger, thicker, stronger tendons. That's good. That's a positive thing. If you want to avoid getting hurt, having thick tendons is a good thing. Most people should realize that at this point. Believe me, you want your tendons to be stronger, and they get stronger by getting bigger and denser. That creates that effect. But the tendon rubbing against something, creating friction, that friction is not what we want. That creates inflammation. And in a worst case, it can cause calcification. So a lot of times when you'll see a lot of people who train certain ways and they start complaining that their elbows or those tendons hurt when they move, what do you think that is? That's calcification of the edge of that tendon where it rubs against the bone. Right now, that's not a good thing. That is never a good thing. It's going to cause you pain and irritation in a worst case scenario for the rest of your life. That's not what we want. So what happens when we do this? We're unloading the stress right there. Right at that point where we would get that stress on the tendon and it would start to side rub it, what happens? We bring our elbows to the dead stop. Our tricep touches the floor. It removes that little bit of stress point right there where that tendon rubs against the bone. This could reduce the chance of developing that tendinitis and calcification. And now we put the tricep into a position at the bottom where the tricep has to explode back up now. So we've removed right there, we're starting to get to that point, that stress. And because we can't use any momentum, we have to use the tricep to start driving it out of the bottom. So that tricep has to contract to get it moving again, kind of like a deadlift for your tricep. How's that? That's a good way to describe the JM floor press. It's like a deadlift for your triceps. Granted, it doesn't use every muscle in your body, but the idea is the same. The tricep has to explode to get the weight moving again. Now, it gets a little bit of help from the pecs and a little bit of help from the front delts, because obviously you're not going to do tricep extensions the same way you're doing here. Though we remove some of that side loading stress that we get on the tendon, that rubbing, that abrasion on the side of it, because that's not what we want. And then we have to explode a heavy weight up using the tricep. It's the primary mover. It's doing most of the work, but while still being a multi-joint exercise. I can tell you, it's an interesting movement. Now, do I feel the deep burn that I get on certain tricep movements? No. I mean, if we talk about a burn, I would say my work with my chains does that the most. If we talk about feeling like a deep cramping contraction, the band work does that the most. Like those band press downs, because we get an overspeed eccentric and a stretch reflex. That tends to give that effect. But when it talks about just feeling the tricep just move a heavy weight, just straight strength, this exercise seems to do really, really well. And it has its own unique feeling. And it's an all-around good, just big size and strength builder for the triceps. Now, this doesn't mean this is the only thing I would ever recommend, because I think some of that chain work and then some of the band work, I think using these things in different combinations is probably going to give you the biggest, strongest overall triceps you might get in terms of all performance elements. But if we need a big, big movement that's easy to recover from, right? Easy to recover from for the triceps, where we can focus on getting them just strong with a big, heavy weight. This is a phenomenal exercise. And in fact, if we were to start thinking in terms of What if it does start to cause a little bit of that tendon issue? Well, we could just throw chains over it, couldn't we? Right? And then even unload it slightly more at the bottom and focus more on the lockout where we have a mechanical advantage. That would also work. And I almost wonder if doing it with chains later, which I'll experiment with also, would give that same deep burn that you get from doing chain extensions and chain rollouts. I might be willing to bet that it will. But this is one of those exercises that you guys could definitely try if you feel like you really, really need to beef your triceps up and you just need overall tricep strength for your big exercises. But again, you can only recover from so much. This might be worth trying, particularly for people with a history of elbow inflammation. Might be worth a try if you need to find a variation. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.